president of the San Francisco branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and also senior pastor of the historic Third Baptist Church. I'm very pleased to join me, an iconic journalist, artist, and student of African American history, Mr. Noah Griffin. His late father was the regional secretary of the NAACP back in the 50s. And to my right here is Reverend Arnold Townsend, who is vice president of the San Francisco branch of NAACP and is a walking encyclopedic mind as it regards San Francisco and its treatment of African Americans in the city. And later, Mr. Griffin will introduce two artists who have been about telling our total history as a nation and as a city in artistic renderings. And I want to begin this conversation by saying the persons who expressed concern over this mural were, I'm sure, well-intentioned and were trying to do a good thing. And there comes a time we must do deep thinking and not surface thinkings, not be governed by sound bites, but by a telling of the whole story. And to that end, the NAACP wants to make it palpably clear that it would be majoring in minor things for us to do a whole lot of brouhaha regarding a mural that the original artist did because he wanted to critique American history. And a part of a critique, you tell the wharf and the woof.
There you go. Mm-hmm. There you go.
It's balanced. It takes two wings for a bird to fly, two wings for an airplane to stay in there.
Go, Reverend, go.
That mural must not come down.
Here, here. Mm-hmm.
It should stay there so that those children, those students, will be led by a faculty that will enable them to know the totality of American history. We cannot deny the fact that slavery was a reality in this country for 350 years. Next week, I will be going to Ghana, West Africa, to be a part of a commemoration of the 400th year of the slave trade. We will leave from Jamestown, Virginia, to go to Jamestown, Ghana, West Africa, where our ancestors were brought to this country against our will to build this country. Therefore, every student should know about that history. And George Washington was complicit in that barbaric treatment of my ancestors.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Also, Mr. George Washington, first president of this nation, was mean to the Native Americans. They invaded this country. They did not come here to say, will you share with us? We're leaving England and we want a better day. But they came here to exterminate the Native Americans. We must never forget that fact and that reality.
Absolutely.
So that at best, if we open up our minds, the teachers, the school board members, the board of supervisors will say to the world, we admit the complicity of this nation in the evil, unjust treatment of black folks and Native Americans. But we're not going to just be sad about it. We're not going to be just about telling how sorry we are. But we're going to show some fruits for repentance. And we're going to show that we are repentant about what happened by making it the case in San Francisco that we have reparations for black people who were pushed out of this city by redevelopment, which was not redevelopment, it was black removal. We're going to make sure that we show that we are sorry for what happened to Native Americans by making sure that we have educational, health, and cultural respect for Native Americans. When we do that, we will become the better, and we will discover that America knows how to learn from its dark, dismal past and be better and not continuously bitter as we are right today with the alt-right and with this president uttering negative, vile, vicious rhetoric. We still have not gotten it yet. But the only way we can get it is that we keep before the world that we have some sins, some dirty sins, that we have not atoned for. And if we don't do that, America will completely destroy whatever was good about America. And we will have lost our souls. Amen. And now I present to you Mr. Noah Griffin, who was a student at Washington High School. He went by that mural, and he can tell you how it impacted him and how he opened up his mind to be a critical thinker.
Thank you, Reverend Brown. Thank you, Reverend Townsend. Thank you, Lope, and also thank you, Dewey Crumpler. I entered George Washington High School in the fall of 1960. I was twice the class president, vice president once, vice president of the school, mayor of the City and Youth and Government Week. I was the first black tennis player to receive a letter in San Francisco sports. I'm in their Hall of Merit and their Sports Hall of Fame. I fought racial stereotyping at the school. When I was asked to play a slave in the Huckleberry Finn musical, I refused. While a junior at George Washington High School, I was a youth delegate to the NAACP convention in Atlanta, where we stayed at Martin Luther King's parents' home, and I first marched against segregation. My senior research paper was done in competition with other student body presidents to become mayor of the City in Youth and Government Week in 1963. It was on de facto segregation in the San Francisco school system, 20 years before it was addressed by the city. I also helped lead the successful Marin County Dixie District name change. We did not demand that the original schoolhouse be changed. Save it, learn from it, teach from it. They did not destroy the concentration camps or the names of the cities, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald. Not only are they maintained, but the ovens are preserved to serve as a ghastly reminder of the history we vowed to have happen never again. Walking by 3 panels to remind us of Washington's slave-owning history, or by a dead Native American teaches us who he was. Those panels don't honor him, they expose him, not as the father of freedom for all, but a placeholder for it. A man who founded an imperfect union, but a nation nonetheless for succeeding generations to build upon. The trauma I experienced as a child was not walking by the historic representation of slave-holding presidents. Only 2 of the first 6 slave presidents did not own slaves, but seeing Emmett Till's mother right here from the pulpit of this very church with the picture of her mutilated son's body shrieking, "I have no more tears to shred." If you want to talk about trauma, that's trauma, identifying with him as a young child. I think back to the 19th century golden trumpet of abolitionism, Wendell Phillips, in his essay on Toussaint Louverture, the father and the liberator of his country, Haiti. Phillips intoned, "I would call him Washington, but the great Virginian owned slaves." He gave him credit for his greatness, for his place in history, but took it away from him for his fatal flaws. I want to thank the school board, for without their raising this issue, we would not be at this historic intersection of art, censorship, and history. You have taught this generation of Washingtonians more than any of these issues could have in any school book. Before I introduce Dewey Crumpler, the artist who did the revolutionary mural adjacent to the mural of which we speak today, I would like to ask Reverend Arnold Thompson, Vice President of the NAACP in San Francisco, to come and speak to us. Arnold, if you would please.
Thank you. Certainly, I can add no eloquence to what we've already heard, but I really want to just hit on the dangers of whitewashing history to make it reflect a history that never existed. It is a real danger. By doing things like this, I recently watched an old favorite John Wayne film where James Caan, El Dorado, a Western, where James Caan pretends to be Chinese and actually fools all the bad guys into believing he is by speaking gibberish and putting a flower pot on his head. An awful depiction. I went to watch it recently on American Movie Classics or the Western Channel, and that scene is cut out. That's something that James Caan should have to live with until he makes atonement for it. We cannot continue to cut out the things that make us uncomfortable, or we will never grow. I can actually envision a future where young people will look at art and wonder and look at a whitewashed history and wonder what African Americans and Native Americans were so angry about. Wonder what the problem was, because in Texas, in the history books in school, they're no longer called into slavery. They've created some other more palatable name for it. We cannot allow this to happen in San Francisco. And to be perfectly honest, because I'm not quite as smart as some of the people I stand with today, I had to be brought around to this way of thinking. My initial knee-jerk reaction is get rid of it. But when I started to talk to people much wiser than I and started to study it, and then, because I didn't go to Washington High, went to the school and looked at the mural, I came to a place where I began to understand it. So I am adamant that the school district should not only allow this to remain, but they should require that the discussion of this mural is a part of every incoming freshman's requirement. And that will then lift us to a higher place. Thank you.
God bless you.
There was an artist who in 1971 was commissioned to do a revolutionary mural, a more contemporized mural about what the contribution of everybody was to the making of America. He did so with the stipulation that the original mural not be touched. And we are graced to have him here today and explain to him his motivation and his feeling. Mr. Dewey Crumpler.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Reverend and these extremely important members who have just spoken. 50 years ago, when I was commissioned to do this work, I too earlier had seen those murals. I was a student in the San Francisco school districts, and I saw that mural when I was in the 11th grade, and I was appalled. Later, I'd learned more about art, and then I was commissioned to work on that mural. And then I studied that mural very carefully. I looked at every image. I looked at every image of the African Americans. I looked at every image of Native Americans. I took the mural very seriously, and it led me to Mexico, where I could study murals with two extraordinary muralists. Siqueiros, who is one of the greatest muralists in the world, and the great Pablo Higgins, who had come to Mexico. And that was made possible because of the great Elizabeth Catlett, who put me in contact with those muralists. When I came back, I understood how Arnautoff had used what many artists use, and that's symbolism, that's archetype, that's images that serve much deeper meaning. And when you have education, which I must say that many young people are not able to have today as a result of cuts in arts education, they have difficulty reading imagery. I was taught how to read imagery. And when you're taught to read art, you can understand that art uses those things to give deeper meaning. And art is always, or very often, met with difficulty, with uncomfortableness. If you take jazz music, for example, it was hated. It was thought to be the worst music in the world, and now it is America's original music gift to the world. Hip-hop was not played on radios, and they came to destroy it. But it was more powerful than they, because the creative process lives in every human being. And so that work inspired hundreds of people all over the world. And I would just also pick up on what was said about Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer provided the world with an image that was deeply difficult for her, made it impossible, her child mutilated. And I saw that work as a 6-year-old, and it made me, it was a horror. My mother helped to explain to me that that's why we left the South, so that you live here in San Francisco. I carried that with me. Fannie Lou Hamer, that image inspired me to be an artist, to make change through art. And of course, that image helped to change the nature of America, which made it possible for great individuals like Martin Luther King and this great general of the civil rights movement next to me to change the world because of that extraordinary courage that she had to provide the world with an image that made us uncomfortable. Art's role, if it's any good at any time in the world, is to make us uncomfortable with the status quo so that we can be about the business of change. And I think those murals critiqued in the 1930s that man that was seen to be the truth teller of America, but indeed was a complicit person who helped to create the very problem that we exist with right now, because he didn't really believe in freedom until he died, so that he was close to his maker. He freed slaves so that he would go have a good reading from God. And I think that is not a noble person. I think that that has many complications to it. And we know from the echoes we hear from that same White House today that the truth and art is about a kind of truth. Not the truth, but a kind of truth is what will take us to another level of consciousness. It's my hope that the board will change their mind and that those images become clearer to young people who, as the Reverend said, will be educated from now and into the future as a result of the power of art and its ability to change.
Mr. Noah Griffin to come back here again. The other thing that he did not say was that he is a graduate of one of our historically black colleges, Fisk University. And he sang in the Fisk Jubilee Choir. Right. But do you know that back in the 1880s, even Bishop Daniel Payne of the African Methodist Church said that black folks should not sing Negro spirituals because he considered them to be nothing but field corn ditties. But when the Fish Jubilee Singers went to England to sing before the Queen, they started singing music that was Eurocentric. And that night they flunked in the concert. But somebody said, why don't you sing the songs that would speak of your history, your sorrows, and your successes? And they started singing the Negro spirituals. And they raised enough money from that tour of Europe that they came back to the United States and they built the oldest building there, Jubilee Hall, because they were true to their history,
Thank you.
they were true to their God, and they were true to their experience. And what we are saying to the school board, be true to the history of this country. Be true to how black people have been taught in the school district. A black person could even get a job teaching in this district until the late 60s. Before that, you had to go to Oakland or you had to go over to Berkeley. We must face our past sins and make amends for them by being reminded that we made progress, but we still have miles to go and promises to keep before we fall asleep. And we will not go those miles and keep those promises until that school board gets more black teachers in this district, until that school board gives out more contracts for black contractors in the city. We will not go those miles and keep those promises until we stop this hemorrhaging and loss of black folks from the city and county of San Francisco. So let us get away from cotton candy politics.
Thank you.
It's sweet, might taste good, but there's no substance to it. And it's time that our school board and our board of supervisors put some meat and substance to their public policy making. Again, we plead, we appeal to our board. Be leaders of scholarship. Be leaders of balanced history. And show the world that you know how to be a critical thinker and tell America's story like it is, and what more we have to do to improve on that dismal, dark history. Now we will field any questions that the press may have.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I know you support the mural staying. Is there anything else you're prepared to do or any action that you are taking to ensure that that happens?
Well, we will get a petition campaign going. We have a lot of friends all over this city, of all faith communities, political persuasions, and we're going to lift high our position so that persons may say, you know, we had not thought about it that way, and we're going to change our minds. Remember one great thinker said, a foolish consistency is for hobgoblins and fools.
Wonderful.
And it's time that we change our gears, we switch our gears. It's just like driving a car. You don't keep the car in high gear, else you burn up the devilish engine. You switch the gears according to the terrain. And it's time that the school board and the board of supervisors switch its gears if it's really concerned, if they are really concerned about the plight of black folk, Native Americans, and the marginalized of our city.
For Dewey Crumpler, I have a question. How do you explain the fact that the superintendent, Dr. Vincent Matthews, said that he was shocked when he saw the murals, and that the Board of Education apparently have not educated themselves about the history of the murals? I mean, it seems strange that they would call for the destruction of these murals without really knowing about the history.
People are often confused by images that they have difficulty reading. And so I think that the person was reading a surface understanding of what they were looking at, and they didn't give it the time to really pay attention. Because I think if you give art time, it will illuminate. But it requires you to be open enough to permit that illumination to take place. And I don't think they were paying attention to that. I think they were paying attention to politics and a kind of blather of air about anger. Anger without thought and direction is a kind of really confused state. And so I think that they were responding to a kind of surface understanding of things.
Reverend,
Yes.
the president of the board, Stevan Cook, is an African-American who refuses also to say the Pledge of Allegiance. What is he missing out? Is he of a younger generation? What would you tell him?
Mama always told me when I went to school in Jackson, Mississippi, before you cross the street, stop, look both ways, and listen, and then cross over. And I don't feel that collectively we have stopped, looked both ways, and listened before crossing over on this issue. So I would appeal to the president, lovingly, respectfully, let's stop, look, and listen both ways before you say, this is it.
I'd like to add something.
Yes.
I'd like to add something to that as well. My friends always fly the flag because they don't want it to belong to the right wing. They always sing the national anthem because it belongs to all of us. If we abdicate our responsibility to this country by giving that flag to the right wing, or giving that national anthem to the right wing, it does not belong to all of us. It is all of ours, and we refuse to let it go.
And I also think it's important to understand that there is a political problem in San Francisco that we take very seriously, that we look progressive, but frequently that devolves down into a Wizard of Oz politics. It looks very powerful and important until you look behind the curtain. And when you look behind the curtain, there's not very much there. A little man pulling levers. And that's kind of our politics in San Francisco. We make these great statements, but there's no substance to it. If our great statements meant anything, the populations of African Americans in this city would now not be at a place where we're almost negligible as far as residing in this city. We don't have substance to our politics. This is the same thing. To say we're getting rid of racist images sounds good, but we're not educating. If art doesn't challenge, we just talked about that with Brother Crumpler. For me, if art doesn't challenge, I don't know what much good it is.
What do you say to the students and families and members of the school's community who reject this mural?
Beg pardon?
What do you say to the students, the teachers, the family members of this community who reject the mural?
Well, first of all, I would say to them, come, let us reason together. It does not become a dichotomous thing of them against us, us against them. It becomes a we thing. We have too much division in this country, and that's a part of the problem right now. That's why we've not done with this original sin of race. Remember, it was William Jefferson Clinton who tried to get us to have conversations. And what happened? His whole conversation was derailed. People didn't want to talk about it. And to get rid of a mural says you don't want to see the reality, that you don't want to talk about it and you don't want to do anything about it. And if we really want to do something about this age-old problem of race, let's start right now, tomorrow. Hit the ground running and to put in motion programmatic efforts to deal with the state of emergency that the San Francisco branch called for going on 2 years ago around the issue of black achievement in the school district. We are the worst performing school district in the state of California as it regards African American achievement. What are we going to do about that? If we don't do anything about that, taking down a mural, again, it's cotton candy politics. And we need to get rid of that. Put some substance to it. Do more than talk, but put it in your walk. And we need to do more walking to move faster toward the day of making San Francisco a beloved community, because right now we look bad in the world community. We have lost more African Americans than any major city in this nation. Shame, shame on San Francisco. The median income for blacks in this town is $29,000 a year, but for whites it's $102,000. A gaping disparity. That's what we ought to be dealing with. That is ought to be focusing our time. That ought to be our laser beam interest. And when we do that, then we can shout and say, hallelujah, look at what we did. But right now, we don't look that pretty. We are in trouble in this city. And all the problem is not down in the South in the Bible Belt. It's right here in San Francisco, staring us in the face.
We need to focus on the major and not the minor. While we're talking about murals, we have black children in this school. I've seen the numbers that frequently score lower in English than students with English as a second language,
yes.
and score lower in math than special ed. I don't know how much getting rid of the murals are going to fix that problem, because what that problem means is that we're turning children out of school, even graduating them, that don't have a handle on the future, that are facing the future of homelessness or imprisonment, because usually that's what ends up for kids who can't read and can't function in society on a level where they can be gainfully employed. And I would ask those parents that you're talking about, what's really important here? I think the murals are important. If you start a critical discussion with kids in the 9th grade around race and the problems that exist in this society, you may that may motivate them to want to learn. But to come into what's going on in our schools now is deplorable, and our attention really ought to be focused elsewhere.
And let me say this, using Noah, again, as an example. You know, in school, when we were in the elementary school, you had an assignment, it was called show and tell. You would come to school and show something, and then you would tell the essence of that which you were showing. Now, again, thanks to one of our historically black colleges, Fisk University, one of his illustrious graduates, Dr. John Hope Franklin, who wrote the book From Slavery to Freedom. And you know what his biography was about? His autobiography? It was about Mirror to America. Mirror to America. I would recommend that those parents and those children read what this gentleman had to say about how America reflected certain ill things. And he was one of the first blacks to get a PhD degree in history from Harvard University. But John Hope Franklin, in Mirror to America, says you ought to always reflect the dark moments and the light moments of America. And he speaks about how he met those dark moments even at Harvard University, which was also complicit in the slave trade. Georgetown, complicit in the slave trade. Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Just the other day, Dr. Moeller, the president, refused to have conversation, to look at the mirror with black preachers and white preachers in Louisville about the history of Southern Seminary, and it was complicit in 1857 in the slave trade, but they didn't even want to discuss reparations. That is what we need to do. Hold up this mural. Let it be reflected. And that mural is nothing but a mirror of George Washington and America.
Well, I'd like to say with respect to the students that when I worked on that mural in the 1960s and began to do research on it, one of the things that I told the administration was that a curriculum had to be developed in relationship to the murals, because if they didn't create a curriculum that would coincide with the history that was being told by both those murals, Arnautoff's and my own, that we would be facing this again. Now, my murals held that controversy at bay until we got a 21st century generation of students. And they see the world very differently. And I think that the lack of curriculum development has helped them to misunderstand how art functions. And I go back to that. Art in the schools, its history and its ability to teach is a central component. And I think everyone on this here today has stated that and stated the benefits of that. And so I'm really hopeful that if this decision can be delayed, can be removed, that the curriculum can update itself so that there might be now a digital relationship to muralization, that instead of that statue of George Washington, they might have a kiosk, a large screen that can discuss each mural and each history, and including the controversial aspects of that history, this very moment. And it could be updated so that it would never live like static murals in a specific time so that they would be misunderstood like Arnautoff's, but they could be a part of the language of the present all the time. But the murals that are there are historic documents, the kind of whitewashing that should never happen again. The books that I had as a student in the San Francisco School District never talked about African Americans. And when I asked my teachers, had African Americans ever did anything important, they said no. Right. Well, of course they said no, because they too had been given books that only gave this fictitious history of America. And that's why it's so important that students have an opportunity to take advantage of the real extraordinary complexity that is available in the digital arena rather than destroying or removing the past, so that we can really walk into the virtual world that will be available as muralization in the future. So it is my hope that that school will really frame another way. It was said in the New York Times that those murals in that school are a national treasure. I believe that. And you don't destroy African American history, our Native American history. I want to see those Africans who were enslaved. I want their pictures to be in front of me. I want the world never to forget that the toiling that helped to shape this world came from those people. I want that genocide that was practiced on Native Americans to be clear. And it can only be clear through images, through providing those images. So it is my deep hope that education be absolutely front and center and not whitewashed in order to give a community the history they wish, which is what most history books did throughout the 20th century.
And I think we should also mention that our former iconic African-American mayor, the first black mayor of this city, Mayor Willie Lewis Brown Jr., would have been here this morning, but he's out of town. And he's made very clear his position on the mural. And that position is, leave it there and teach the city and the world about how bad our past was, what more we must do now to clean up that past. His daughter went there. She shares the same position. And Anthony Gerald Wagner, one of the top African-American health administrators, was over Laguna Honda Hospital, now chairman of Southern Health Board, says, my two boys went there. They didn't have any problem with the mural. And personally, I feel the mural must stay there to tell the real story, the whole story of this city and this nation.
Someone asked a question recently, why is it the Germans keep alive the memory of Auschwitz and the ovens and the murders, and in the U.S., we don't want to mention it, we don't want to bring it up, we don't want to deal with reparations. And the answer they got from someone is because the Germans are ashamed.
And I just want to say, lastly, I hope it puts an end to the myth that only white people are for keeping the murals. Black people are for keeping them as well.